To make a start, thank you all for coming. This is a multidisciplinary session looking at the registries, which has really been a great development to encourage Australian data and also to get continuing professional development hours. And we've got a panel here, myself, we've got Hemal from Sydney, we've got Judy, Graham from Brisbane, and Mark Gillies. Has been great to be on the panel. And we've got a mixture of Retina, Corneal, Glaucoma, and some other parts. Matthew's here talking about retinal blindness, and Ashley at the end will talk about registries and more personalised medicine.
So to start the session, ask Professor Lawrence Lee, Chair of the CPD Committee, to start the session, please.
The first slide. Oh, here it is. So the RANZCO CPD has had to develop a new framework based on the recommendations of the Medical Board and Medical Council of New Zealand. There were many discussions back in 2017 to 2018, and you can see here this little summary. There were 115 stakeholders involved, so they really consulted all the colleges, and they came up with the framework because they looked at revalidation by examination, and that was their initial starting point. And what they came up with was definitely we don't want examinations, but we'll come up with a framework which encourages doctors to learn and be safe. So this is where it came from. So the changes were not from RANZCO, no, it's Australia-wide government regulation. And hopefully you'll find it's not as bad as it seems. Anything new, people are reluctant to uptake, but hopefully over time you'll see it'll become easy, and it is online. So this is just the framework which they gave as their background principles, as well as strengthening your CPD, assuring safe practice. They looked at dealing with practitioners with difficulty, looked at cultural safety, and looked at providing support. But what we need to know is how do you do it? Well, you need 50 hours. We've moved from points to hours now. And they're into groups. There are, I'll get back. You've got education, reviewing performance and measuring outcomes. They've been grouped together because there is a lot of overlap. And then other, which means any of the other groups can fit that space. So it's not a lot actually when you add it up. Now, the professional development plan is something which is a government requirement, and there are two parts. Part A, which you've done mostly, have done this. It's just a list of what you plan to do, but it's your own list. You don't have to go by that list exactly, but it's just how you plan to do your CPD for the year. And that has to be done by April. And now Part B is a list which includes what you have in Part A, what you actually achieved, and then you can make notes on what you've actually learned for the year. Then there's another section which below, for example here, this is the first set of questions. What did I complete? What did I learn? And what didn't I learn? And why didn't I start it? Those are the questions which you'll fill out. There's an example, which one I did, education, what things we've done, teach registrars, attend conferences, fan clubs, angiogram meetings. Each of the categories you'll fill in what you've done. I've done audits, I've been on several committees. So it's just a list, and then you can put notes, and if you use your information from your reflection in each of the activities, then these would go in here. Next year, the IT are going to improve the interaction between Part A to Part B. And this is what you didn't do. So anything why you didn't do it, you can put a point there. It doesn't have to be a lot, just note form will do. And then the second part was how do you satisfy different qualities of a general ophthalmologist? Did you do leadership? Did you learn something clinically? Were you culturally safe? Were you ethical? Did you reflect on your practice? These are little points. You just need 5 out of the 9. I put participation in committees, involvement in education, learning new clinical knowledge. So those are the things you put down on what you've learned for the year. Now, just getting back to the activities, which are in the CPD guidebook on the CPD home, it's broken up. And if you look at these categories, you'll see they're similar to the old categories. We just brought them into hours. Like you've got completing journals, you're attending conferences 5 hours per day. So to this conference, if you're doing 4 days, it's 20 hours of education. The reviewing performance, these are quality assurance activities, things like risk management, being on committees such as board council or other, hospital practice risk, medical advisory committees, these will go in here. And those actually up to 25 hours in the year. Other things, all the examiners would put their hours here. And if you're on the selection committee, these will go in here. There's another one, 5 hours per day. There's no limit on how many days for that. And all the professional development stream of the college, these non-clinical streams, which we've got here at Congress, can actually fit into that RANZCO professional development activities. So you can obtain reviewing performance hours quite easily. This shows here how you enter it. You go to the website, once you've found it, learning, and then you can look in the drop-down box to find different activities, or you can go to the CPD home, you can find it, and then you do the activities. Some activities are online as modules, and we are developing more content for our members. Measuring outcomes, it includes all the registries, which we'll talk about. RANZCO has an audit tool, RCAT, which hopefully will be improved further. The other types of audits, if you have your own audits, so some states have developed their own local audits. These are all included as a critical audit. So they all would fit 12.5 hours, but you can do 2 if you want, 2 or 3 even, but it's the maximum, this and the number category 2 will be 25 hours. But you use also 12.5 hours in other as well. So same principle, you go to the CPD home, hit the learning, and then look at the drop-down box, and you go through it. The CPD home at the moment is on the last page of the learning module, but there are quick links on the front page of our college website. So if you need support, I think the booth here at the Congress has been very busy, and you can try to make a time or just line up and then ask them any questions you have, because I know there are a lot of questions, but if they go through it with you, you'll find it's a really easy process and shouldn't really take as much time as you would think. Thank you. So we'll hold the questions till maybe you can go to the booth for CPD, because it's a big task to answer everybody's questions. And if I did introduce Nigel. Nigel is a member of the board and member of the CPD committee. He's going to talk about the importance of eye disease registries.
Thanks. Well, thanks. I guess the reason why I'm at the podium is because, I think it was 2005, and Mark Gillies and I were sitting on the dock of Hobart Bay having a beer, shooting the breeze, and I was extolling the virtues of modern computing and internet and how these are going to transform medical records and the way we practice, because you aggregate all the information you have about things and the computer will tell you what you need to know there and then in front of the patient. Now here we are quite some time later, but we've made progress and we're getting there, and it's pleased to see the number of audits that are available as a registry. What I wanted to do is to outline why participating in a registry actually makes a good deal of sense if you want to get your outcomes hours, because half your CPD requirement now requires performance review and outcomes review. And it can be fairly difficult to do outcomes review properly. But do we really need to do a lot of personal outcomes review? Because essentially process dictates outcome. And I'd put it to you that if you spend a good period of your hours examining and going through your processes, you will do a lot better with your outcomes. And essentially, you're doing it already because we have good evidence to say that quality medical practice comes from reviewing one's processes and continuously updating those. Outcomes are useful, but they're better done as a population, aggregated, and I'll explain why. Here we go with some population data on cataract surgery out of Western Australia over a 20-year period. And you can see the blue line showing the drop in complications, sight-threatening complications over that time, along with the large increase in the volume of cataract surgeries. And you can see this improvement was done without any outcomes audit process in place. And it shows that clinicians naturally are wanting to do better ongoing. And that was simply from tidying up, improving, advancing their processes. You can see the dates there, and what that shows is a transition from intracap to extracap to phacoemulsification. So I think that's compelling evidence that we do well just as we are, but it's imposed upon us to do a bit more in a formal sense through the CBT framework. Second is the law of large numbers. Now, what you're looking at there is a computer-generated program, and it simply shows what the computer does with a coin toss. Now, you've got 50% chance of getting either heads or tail each toss, and that's run over 1,000 tosses, and each of those coloured lines is a separate run. So you start the program off, and it flips the coin and it shows you the relative change. And you can see it, to get to the true 50% probability, you're looking well over 700 coin tosses. And you can in fact have quite large deviations from what would be considered 50-50 early in the piece. Another way to put that is small numbers mean greater variance. And underpowered studies are due to small numbers often. And this example here just shows that simply by collecting enough patients, you can transform data that was not particularly significant into something that may be of interest. And you can see the first group is essentially the same, and all they've done is added in the second group more collected data, and that tightens up the confidence intervals on the left there. So small numbers are not particularly useful in evaluating outcomes. The other thing about variance is as a standard deviation, and by this I mean the population standard deviation, is wider, and that's the width of the bell curve, is larger. You need a lot more patients, a lot more in your sample to achieve a result. And conversely, if you are dealing with a very small difference between two groups you might be examining, you also need a lot more people in your sample. Smaller effects may not be relevant. And you can see that the effect size shown in tabulation form there, and as a couple of bell curves, is what it's all about. Now, if you're trying to determine something like posterior capsule rupture, where the rate is around about 2%, it's nigh on impossible for you to do that as an individual audit over one 12-month period. And think about other areas where you're looking for small differences. Doing that individually is just a real waste of time. And it's suggested that you really need an effect size of greater than 0.8 to be worthwhile. Now, to show that in another way is the issues of false positives and false negatives. If you're not quite sure what's what, hopefully that diagram puts it into context. If you are not got the appropriate numbers, you end up not being able to draw a conclusion. And the standardised effect size and the power of the study, which is the rate at which you're trying to eliminate false negatives, is shown on the left. And if anyone wants to do a bigger study, this diagram on the right is available on the internet, and it tells you what you need to collect to show a certain difference. And if you're going for an effect size of 1 and a power of 0.8, which are the accepted generalised standards, at significance level of 0.05, you're looking around about 35 patients in each group. Okay, so because of the interaction between all those parameters, it changes quite quickly. So the study design is everything if you're going to achieve a result. Again, it shows in the red hatch there the false positives, that's the alpha or the type 1 error, and the blue hatched area there, the false negatives, and that's the beta or 1 minus beta, and the false negatives. If you're trying to do a study and want to make some sense out of it, you really have to control all those at the outset. And it's not easy to get your head around. And I'm not so sure I'm doing any better at explaining it just now. So why you want to do registries is because it's so much easier. You know, you've got the experts, they've got the data collection that's required for the study sorted. They do the analysis, they've set up the programs that allow you to input the data. You get grouped data coming back that is useful. It is possible to benchmark yourself against others if it's relevant. And, you know, in the 5 hours that you're required to do these can easily be met by just simply joining a registry. So I don't know whether that convinces you, but it certainly convinced me because registries are a big thing now, and thanks to Mark, he's really made a go of it.
In the interest of time, we'll move on to the next speaker.
Yeah, I'd like to invite Dr. Miriam Keane. Miriam's going to talk about the Australian Corneal Graft Registry, something that's been going on for many years. So thanks, Miriam.
Okay. So I'm delighted to be presenting on behalf of the team at the Corneal Graft Registry today. And I'll just acknowledge at this point that we are currently funded by Donate Life through to 2025. So the ACGR has been collecting data on corneal grafts in Australia for over 37 years now, and we've collected data on over 43,000 grafts in that time. The key aim of the registry is to assess the outcomes of corneal grafts, in particular survival and best corrected visual acuity attainment. Graft recipients are followed indefinitely until graft failure, knowledge of recipient death, or other loss to follow-up. We release major reports at regular intervals, and the latest one of these was released this year in May. We were also pleased to be invited to write a review paper on the latest findings of the registry, and this was published in the Journal of Clinical and Experimental Ophthalmology in June. In addition to this, we also perform individual surgeon audits for those with more than 20 follow grafts, and these can be used to obtain CPD points. So quickly looking at the two main types of analyses that we perform. On the left is an example of a Kaplan-Meier survival analysis, which can be used to compare the survival over time in different cohorts of grafts. In the example here, we're looking at the differences between the full-thickness penetrating keratoplasties, traditional lamellar patch grafts, and the 3 cohorts of the modern lamellar grafts. These analyses make up the bulk of the reporting that we do and allow us to examine the potential impacts of donor, recipient, and surgical factors on transplant survival. We also then perform further analyses to see how those factors that were found to be significant interact with one another. On the right is a graph showing the median best corrected visual acuity attainment in surviving penetrating keratoplasties. For this cohort, we now have data following up to 20 years post-graft. These analyses allow us to examine whether BCVA improves significantly post-graft, how long it takes to achieve vision of 6 on 12, and how long the improvement can be maintained for. We can also make comparisons between multiple groups. For example, comparing BCVA changes across graft types that are performed for the same underlying disease. Additionally, we also collect some data and report on complications following grafting and subsequent interventions that are performed, as both these can affect survival and BCVA. And we also look at the reasons that the grafts fail for each of the different graft types. While outside of our usual remit, the ACGR has also been able to document the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on provision of corneal transplantation in Australia. Pleasingly, as shown in the figure on the left, the number of registered grafts remained consistent over the last 2 years compared to the 5 years prior. However, we did see a large variation in the times of year that these grafts were performed. For the 5 years prior to 2020, which is shown in the right graph by the blue line, there were fairly regular proportions of grafts registered each month from February to November each year. And then we traditionally saw a drop-off over the summer holiday period in December and January. In 2020, which is represented here by the orange line, we saw a massive drop in the number of transplantations in April with the national lockdown and the associated restrictions on surgery. It does show, though, that some surgeries did continue to be performed during this time. The following months saw an increase in grafts as surgeons strove to make up for these cancellations. The secondary Victorian lockdown in August also led to an associated dip in numbers and subsequent higher graft numbers in November and December that year. In 2021, represented by the green line, surgery initially returned to a similar pattern to the pre-2020 figures, before again being interrupted by surges in COVID-19 case numbers and associated surgery postponements in the latter third of the year. Another way in which the ACGR has been able to contribute to the ophthalmic community recently was by providing the Medical Services Advisory Committee with data showing the reduction in registered grafts for keratoconus over the last decade. This information was requested to assist the MSAC in assessing the validity of continuing to provide Medicare benefit schedule support for corneal collagen cross-linking. Additionally, we've been collecting data on the history of collagen cross-linking in corneal transplant recipients and have been able to show that there is no significant difference in the survival of subsequent corneal grafts in recipients who have previously undergone this procedure. So I'd just like to say thank you to our contributing surgeons at this time. At this point there's over 1,200 of those, and also to the 5 Australian eye banks who provide us the information on the corneal donors. As I mentioned, we had a major report released in May, and that's available freely online at the URL shown here. Or if you'd like me to mail you a USB, just have a word to me afterwards and I'll get that in the mail to you next week. And I'm happy to take any questions.
I think we're doing questions at the end, is that right?
We can ask now.
Okay,
There's a bit of time.
feel free.
If there's any, please make your way up to one of the microphones and feel free to ask any questions that you have. In the meantime, I might just ask the panel if you've got any questions for Miriam as well.
Thank you for that. I just wondered, there's a lot of talk about sustainability. Have you had any data, or are we looking at perhaps splitting the corneal grafts, for the endothelial and the delcs? They're not wasting tissue. Is that something that you'll be capturing, or is that something we're looking at?
We do have the occasional graft that is registered where we're informed by the eye bank that both the posterior and the anterior parts of the lenses lens have been used, and so we do keep a record of that. That's something that is for the eye banks to be working out with the TGA and everything, whether or not that goes ahead, and obviously with the surgeons about whether or not that's practical. But we're certainly collecting that information when it's provided to us to make sure that in the future, if that is something that happens, we'll be able to analyse that and the outcomes and check that there's no difference there.
Miriam, could I ask you, when DMAC first came out, that there was quite a lot of tissue being lost? I heard some figures like 30% in that learning curve. Have you found that surgeons are getting better at DMAC and less tissue is being lost?
Well, certainly we've had a look at the primary non-functioning levels of DMACs and also DSECs, and pleasingly for both of those cohorts, it continues to improve over time. So there's still, the levels of early failure are still higher than the traditional full thickness grafts and things like that. But then we also look at, for instance, the analysis of looking at best corrected visual acuity attainment. Yes, you have that earlier failure rate, but then we look at comparing the visual outcomes, the VA jumps to that better level of 6 on 12, 6 on 7.5 a lot quicker with the endothelial keratoplasty. So at the moment, it's still looking like there's still that early failure rate that's going to continue to persist, but it has certainly improved over the last decade. But it's always that balancing act of what's going to be the best outcome for the patient, both in terms of survival and visual acuity.
Miriam, can I ask as a practical question in terms of how long does it take the clinician to put the data in for per entry?
I mean, I can't answer that. It's on a paper form, so it's going to vary for each clinician. It can be, the registration form is fairly free flowing. I think the real time commitment comes in the follow-up. So we do a follow-up request once a year, and obviously, as I said, we follow the grafts indefinitely. The time between follow-up requests does extend out over time, but yeah.
Well, please.
I was just wanting to thank you for your presentation. It's great to see the work of the registry continuing. I was surprised to see the failure rate for PK at 37 years. Is that because the grafts failed or all the patients died?
Yeah, so it continues to go down. So we obviously have some grafts that have been followed that are surviving at that time point, but it is a combination of graft failure and loss to follow-up through either death or simply not being followed by the clinician anymore. So certainly you don't expect every graft to fail by that point, but our figures show that grafts have the potential to survive for that length of time, and certainly some are. And we love getting the forms in that say, this graft was performed in 1986. It's great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I now have the pleasure of inviting Professor Stephanie Watson. She's going to talk about fight corneal blindness. So thanks, Stephanie.
No, thank you. Gosh, these lights are super bright today, so I can't see you, but I'm going to talk about the Fight Corneal Blindness project. And look, clinical registries in ophthalmology have been growing in number and growing in importance. And the Safe Sight Registries is a virtual platform, and the Fight Corneal Blindness sits under the Safe Sight Registries banner and deals with corneal diseases. We have both ophthalmologists and optometrists using the registry, so it's the first multidisciplinary registry. Here we can see the current structure of the Safe Sight Registries, and for the Fight Corneal Blindness project, there's currently a keratoconus and dry eye registry. How it works is you can put data in prospectively while the patient's there, or it can be entered retrospectively. You can have your orthoptist help you put the data in before, so when you see the patient, most of the data is already there. You have a baseline visit, which is the first visit, and then every subsequent visit, more information can be added and you can track the patient's outcomes over time. The registry includes patient-reported outcomes measures, and this is really important because you can actually find out how the patient is going and how they're going with their treatments. Now, everyone thinks, gosh, that sounds like a nightmare from workflow. Is it going to take me more time? So we did a time in motion study to see whether, first users of the registry actually had their practices slowed down by registry use. But we didn't find that. We found that it was compatible with everyday clinical practice because there was time saved in flicking through paper notes or looking at other sources of data. And most of the clinicians said that they were highly satisfied, up to 97%, with registry use. So the Save Site Keratoconus Registry currently has 88 clinicians from 76 sites in 7 countries, and we have over 35,000 clinical visits from close to 4,000 patients. There's sort of things we've been looking at with the registry data, as well as it allowing you to monitor your own practice and obtain CPD points. It's also been a tool for research. And we've been looking at cross-linking, but it does include all treatments, including laser and combining laser with cross-linking, rings, corneal grafts for keratoconus. So this is one of the things we've been looking at. Patients always want to know, is my keratoconus progressing? We did a systematic review to try to find the answer, but many of the studies were done before modern topography. We did, though, find an effect with these earlier studies that the steeper you were and the younger you were, the more likely you were to progress. And each of these dots here is a study, and the size of the dot represents the number of patients in the study. And you can see the general trends there. So we used the registry to repeat the data using modern topography in everyday conditions, and we found that there was an effect on Kmax, Kmax and age with progression. So we found progression was more likely if you were 21 years than 26, if your Kmax was greater than 55, and both K2 and K-mean are sensitive measures. And importantly, this progression could occur within 12 months, so you can't leave patients who are young too long between the reviews. If you're young and you have steep corneas, it's likely you might get worse within a year, but you won't, generally won't lose your vision. We've also used this data to find out, well, what's cross-linking going to do for my cornea? And for clinicians using the registry, they can put their own protocol in there and they can get outcomes reports which will show how their treatments are going. When we looked at the aggregate data for 5-year outcomes, we found that vision and topography both improved further at 5 years than reported at 1 year. So the 1 year outcomes are in red and the 5 years in pink. Adverse events were mostly also within the first year. For your patients, you can download this free brochure which explains corneal cross-linking to them. So we can say that cross-linking does have a lasting effect from this registry data. Your vision and corneal shape may improve over time. You may not need a transplant, but if you need one, you can still have one. And what type of cross-linking should be performed? And we've done the largest study. It's multinational, multi-centre with 725 eyes to look at sort of conventional versus short corneal cross-linking. And we found that, for both techniques, mean vision improved, Kmax decreased, K2 decreased, and minimum thickness decreased and increased. And basically that it was equally effective in both groups, but for the shorter treatment, there is a benefit for patients. We've also looked at whether you can shorten your riboflavin times, and you can reduce from 30 to 15 minutes with the same outcomes. Adverse events typically occur at a year, and so with the registry, you can compare your rates of adverse events to other people in the registry. The optometry module will allow data to go between ophthalmologists and optometrists. So if you have a referring optometrist, they can refer their data, send their data to you within the registry. And after you're finished cross-linking or whatever treatment, you can send the data back. and they'll be looking at contact lens outcomes. So we've been increasing the amount of data each year. This in the centre here is an example of a benchmarking report that you can generate just by the click of a button. And the patient journey graph is what you'll see after putting your data in, and you can share with your patient while they're actually in front of you. And that tracks treatments, vision and corneal shape. It's CPD accredited. So look, both procedures for cross-linking, short and long, are similarly effective for improving vision and keratometry outcomes. And overall, there's low rates of adverse events. But accelerated cross-linking may be recommended because it's more convenient. And is it safe? This is data from the registry looking at 1 year and 5 years. And you can see most of the events occur within the first year. And this is the range of events, and there are others, the main ones that are collected by the registry. So look, usually, and the most common adverse event there was corneal haze. So for most patients, you can say, look, your corneas are going to get hazy. Loss of vision is a risk, but it's not common. And to avoid infection, take care with your contact lens hygiene or hygiene afterwards. So, so the Safe Sight Dry Eye Registry, it was launched in December 2020, a great time with COVID. And we now have 42 clinicians from 37 sites in 7 countries. And we're doing this registry because there's actually a lack of real-world data on dry eye, particularly the natural history and comparative treatment outcomes. And so we wanted to get real-world data. Dry eye clinical trials typically only run for about 3 or 6 months. And so we don't really have long-term data on the outcomes. You can fill out a PROM, and this can be done either on paper, or the patient does it, on an iPad, or you can send them a link to their phone. And that's the same for the keratoconus registry, where the cork is filled out. And so when you see the patient, you can see what score they got on their questionnaires. And this is a page from the registry. And you can see over time here for this patient, all their scores on OSDI and Ocular Comfort Index, and down below, you can see what treatments they've been on. And this is very handy, and it also allows you to fill your obligations if you want to prescribe Icurvis with an authority script, because you'll also get a corneal score. This is some of the screenshots from the registry. We have a lot of keys with diagrams or photographs to help you grade the findings. This is the grading for ocular surface staining. We have one, and we found that most patients actually had none to minimal staining because they had evaporative dry eye. This is the staining score, which is required if you're trying to get an authority for Icurvis. This is how the outcomes data summary page looks once you've put your data in for each eye. And you can see there that you've got some basic parameters that you would record for dry eye patients, and then you've got the treatments. And we have some compulsory fields and then some additional fields which you don't have to fill in, but they can be used by people with an interest in dry eye. Here are the additional examinations. So it's things like conjunctival chalasis and lid parallel conjunctival folds, tear meniscus height. Again, there's a benchmarking report that is produced, so you can review how many patients you're treating and what you're giving them. So just to summarise, the benefit of using the Fight Corneal Blindness registries is that it's easy to use, you can track, you can analyse, it's anonymous, and your data, the data standards meet privacy requirements. You can also be part of these publications and collaborations, and if people come up with an idea that they want investigated, we're happy to work with them on that. We have IT training and support, and as I've said, there's benchmarking as well of your practice. Interested in joining, then the information is here. Please be in touch. It's on the web. And thank you to the team of the registries and the Dry Eye Steering Committee. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I certainly think that the dry section is really good for Icurvis applications, because often patients come in and you need to score them. Are there any questions from the audience? Otherwise, I think in the interest of time, we'll move on. Thank you so much. Next, I would like to introduce Professor Jamie Craig to come up to talk to us about the Australian and New Zealand Registry of Advanced Glaucoma. Thank you.
Thanks very much for the invitation. I would just like to start by acknowledging the people who work in the registry. That's Emmanuel, Bronwyn and Carolyn, who do a terrific job in collating and interacting with the referrers, and I want to thank all the referrers and the patients as well. So this started out really with a sort of a question about why do people go blind from glaucoma and what could we do to reduce that outcome or prevent it. So I guess this was really in the spirit of just an update. So I wanted to start just saying what we were doing, what we set out to do, some of the things that we've done, but then just focus on the newer things that are sort of coming along and what we'd like to hear from you on. So in terms of referral, the website's the easiest way. So that's just been updated and renewed, and it now has a .com.au. So www.anzrag.com.au, and you can do referral on a live PDF from that form, but we do take written, faxed or phone call contact to us, and we manage all the things like consent from the office. So it's a very short process for you to talk to a patient and just say, would you be interested in this? And then once that's been agreed, then we'll communicate with the patient. So the form and the clinical data doesn't take long at all. It's a few minutes, 2 or 3 minutes. And if there's missing data, we can fill that in later, but it can be done digitally and just submitted from the PDF, from the live PDF. But there's some other contact information there, phone number, email, fax, so we'll take it anyway. So when we look back to the beginning, I guess we started about 15 years ago, and these were some of the aims, but effectively we wanted to get DNA and clinical data from a very large cohort of patients with severe glaucoma, so we needed a good tight definition of that. We also wanted to feed things back to patients, so genetic results of genes that we knew were involved in glaucoma, and also we set out to aim to actually discover new genes and find different combinations that would be useful clinically. We've had a genetic counsellor, Emmanuel Suzo, from the beginning, and she's managed cascade testing for mycilin where families are involved to help them to prevent bad outcomes once we find that gene. So the primary open-angle glaucoma category, pathway A, 2 points missing on the central Humphrey visual field, or a mean deviation of -15, or if you can't do a field, you've lost acuity from glaucoma. So this was, I guess, the important area that we started on. Secondary glaucomas are allowed and encouraged, exfoliation, pigment dispersion. And just to quickly look at some numbers, overall we're dealing now with around 8,000 DNA samples and about 3,500 advanced, and non-advanced a couple of thousand, and we've moved into early glaucoma and progression in the Progressor study, and we work with family members who we don't have DNA on yet but are collecting another 3,700 or so. So just to give a quick snapshot of a few things, Emmanuel has managed over 3,000 mycilin accredited result feedbacks, and that's led us to work with about 100 families and a couple of hundred individuals who have these mutations, and in doing so we will have prevented visual loss in some of those younger members who are picked up as suspects or before they have disease. Patients who don't have a major mutation like that, we also work with the families if the patients want us to contact family, and we give clinical detailed information about the index case that goes to the relatives who then take that to their optometrist or specialist, so they get better personalised care because of that, and that process is ongoing for advanced and non-advanced. We're also very interested in all these secondary glaucomas, so we have a really great collaboration now with Janie Wiggs in the US, where we're working on childhood glaucoma, and Lockie Knight here has done a PhD and just submitted on that area. I won't go through all of those examples, but just to highlight a couple of things. For paediatric glaucoma, we screen all of these genes for copy number variation and mutations, and Lockie's put together a very clear picture now. Things like developmental, we find 70% of cases can be explained. Congenital PCG, we're down around 30%, so that's what that collaboration is about, to build upon that and find those sort of missing genes, and all the time new things are coming along, which is great. So what about what's new? We developed an interest in nanophthalmos, so we're keen to hear about that, and we did formally exclude uveitic and traumatic glaucoma, but now we sort of have a more open policy to really study the whole disease. We became interested in suspects and progression, and I guess the new thing that we're really becoming involved in is polygenic risk scoring. And so this is close to the clinic now, and we think next year we'll have tests that you can order, and that's through an industry collaboration. And there is some representation here at the meeting about that. I'm happy to talk to anyone who would like to trial the use of PRS for their early glaucoma cases. Ayub spoke this morning about visual field progression, and I've got a slide from his talk there. It's clear that high PRS individuals do have more rapid progression. We already had published that they have more surgery, so they're more likely to need incisional surgery. And this is really fresh data looking at initiation of treatment in suspects and escalation of treatment over the course of the progressive study, the longitudinal study of early disease. And it's very clear that we can separate patients in high and low risk groups, and that's, the treatment obviously slows progression, so the progression result is even more striking in the light of that. So that was really the update, and we're very keen to hear from anyone at all, whether you have one patient to refer or many patients. And in some cases, people have sent the one very severe or interesting case, and it's led us to a really important breakthrough for that case and family members. So I'd just finish by acknowledging the large team, and particularly the progressor investigators, of whom we've been speaking about that study a bit at the meeting, and I'm really grateful for everyone's hard work and the funding from various sources, including the Eye Foundation, who got us going at the very beginning with the FRB registry as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jamie. That's fascinating work, what you're doing. Is it really easy for the patients, if we refer them, that your team would just contact them directly? Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, depending on where they are. I mean, in our centres, we often take blood there and then. It can be done by saliva now as well. But everyone else, we post out a collection kit with blood tubes. Anywhere in the country, they take it to their GP or a pathology service, and it gets sent back in the regular post. So it's really easy. And they just receive a phone call at a relaxed pace to answer any questions they've got and do the consent in the same postal setup. So not difficult.
Yeah, fantastic. Is there any other questions from the audience? Otherwise, I think we'll move on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Next, I would like to introduce Professor Lawlor to talk to us about the other part of the Safe Site Registry, Fight Glaucoma Blindness. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So, look, we've heard a little bit about the background of Safe Site Registries, and so I thought I'd just focus more on the practical aspects of the glaucoma registry here. There is, I guess, a bit of a conflict here in, I'm not actually presenting any data from the registry, so it's not so relevant, but Glaucos has funded the setup of this registry. And really, I just wanted to look at 3 steps today. So we'll look at the individual patient data and how things can be useful for showing a patient their own data. Then individual clinician data, so aggregating all of my data to see how am I doing as a clinician. And then thirdly, looking at the overarching data, which is publishing some of the research aspects of this. Just to give you an idea, this trying to set up a registry, and it's been alluded to from some of the other talks, is that the burden of data entry is the thing that we always come back to and we find really challenging. And in setting up the registry, you really try to do the minimum number of possible fields that you can to accurately phenotype a patient and not make it too onerous for data entry. And this is the baseline visual field, baseline data that we get on every glaucoma patient. It's trimmed down as much as we can, but it's still, we recognise it's quite a lot. And so it is a bit of hard work to get it in. In a practical sense, the way that I do it is when my orthoptist will set up a list for me and make sure that I've selected lenses and things for the cataract cases, any glaucoma cases will have this done as part of the setup of the list. And so at that time, that baseline data is entered, and it minimises the amount of work that I have to do because somebody else is doing most of this, and I can just check that the diagnosis is correct and the phenotyping is correct and then sign off and finalise it. The follow-up visits are much quicker, and these ones, even on a really busy day, you can't do it, but sometimes you can certainly find, I can do this within about 20 seconds if everything's very standard in a follow-up visit. That's not including a visual field, and the visual field and the nerve fibre layer are optional, so you don't have to do that because we obviously don't do it at every visit. But that one's a lot quicker, so getting the baseline in is really the key. Like I said, the biggest thing that comes back from people not taking up the registry is the challenge of the data entry. And so I think the tip that I'd have, the 2 things, one is don't think that you have to do it all yourself. And so if you have an orthoptics team or paramedical staff who can help, that's really helpful. And in the public setting, we've actually put a lot of data in by using master's students or trainees who are interested in publications in a particular area. And so I think harnessing other people, because we're all very busy and sometimes this can get deprioritised as a task, is trying to find other people who can support you in that. Makes it a lot more likely that the data will actually get into the registry. Having said that, I think that we're now really, I was just chatting to Mark about this yesterday, is we're really starting to see a big uptake in data coming into the registry. And so obviously people are starting to see value in this. Colin Clement has just submitted a paper looking at almost 2,500 iStent inject patients with over 300 of them making 3 years of follow-up. So these are really great numbers that we can now start to see how things are going. And it's now extending a little bit beyond that into a number of the MIGS devices and also filtration surgery. So a lot of glaucoma specialists are looking at their trabeculectomies, 600 of those, and that will then allow us to say we can start to look at trabeculectomy. Well, how does the Presipro, the new kid on the block, how does that relate to our standard of care treatments? So from the start, I was talking about the different aspects. So this is an individual patient, and sometimes I can, you can see that I've just shown the blue line and the red line are pressure measurements, left eye and right eye, and you can see that as it tracks along, that there's a sudden drop in the pressure as you have a filtration surgery, and then that's in the blue eye, we'll call it the blue eye, and the red eye, same travels along, and then has another intervention, and you can see the pressure changing in relation to that. And again, with a patient, that can be really nice to show them the effect of the treatment. Then the next step is the individual clinician data. So here I've just pulled out some of my iStent patients on the left and some of my trabeculectomies on the right. And it just gives you a nice, using a scatter plot so you can see pre-op and post-op pressures in each individual patient. Red dots are people who are off drops completely. Blue dots are people who are using glaucoma medications. And yellow dots are patients who have had to have a secondary procedure within the follow-up window. And again, I find this really helpful because I could pull up my trabeculectomy patients and look at my Zen patients, for example, and decide, you know, at what point should I be choosing which procedure for which patient. And you can also compare that to the registry as a whole. So again, as we were talking before about some of the audit aspects, am I doing well? Am I doing as good as my peers? And if not, how can I improve to make sure that I'm doing better? And then the final point then is obviously we're now moving into this stage with the registry that we've got a really nice amount of data that we're starting to put these publications in and starting to help to answer really, really useful clinical questions. So the bottom right one there was the question is if you're doing a cataract operation and you want to combine it with a transtrabecular device, doesn't matter whether you use an iStent inject or a Hydrus. And so we could show with this registry really big numbers, 24-month outcomes, and we could show that there really wasn't, both of them were effective and there wasn't a huge difference between the two. And as I mentioned, that paper on the left that Colin's leading is looking at like 3-4 year outcomes with large cohorts. And so that can really help us to understand which patients should we use this in. And obviously we're very inclusive, so anybody who contributes to the registry we then bring on board with authorship of these publications, and people who are interested in leading a publication, you know, very happy to chat about that and use some of this data because we're getting really large numbers in there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mitchell. I really do support the Safe Sight Registry. I think your team and Stephanie's team is fantastic. You can contact them and they get your login quite easily. And now with all these new stents coming out, it's really nice to have that display, and it's very good for patient education. Any questions from the audience about the registry? No?
Mitchell, I might ask you a question. You've got a lot of experience now with the registries in terms of, we can see there's benefits for patients in terms of tracking these outcomes. There's benefits to the clinician because it helps them meet their CPD requirements. So what do you think are the barriers or the reasons there's not like 100% uptake?
Well, like I alluded to, I mean, I think the barrier is the data entry, and we all know that that's the challenge, and so that's something working in the background on the idea of single point data entry is the holy grail that we're all working towards, and trying to have a situation where you could enter your data into your electronic medical record and then it automatically flows through into the registry. That's clearly, and you know, that's not as easy as it sounds, but it's certainly something that we're working towards. But I'm actually amazed that so many people are using it despite the challenges with it. And I guess like I said, we are in a fortunate position where I think we can use some of the team around us to make that burden of data entry a little bit easier. But once we get single point data entry, I think that's when we're going to see a real exponential change in these numbers.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'd like to introduce Dr. Rohan Essex, talk about the ANZSRS Retinal Surgery Registry. Thank you.
Thank you. They are bright lights, aren't they? Firstly, acknowledging the Yagara and Turrbal people, I think, the traditional owners of Brisbane. I'm here from Ngunnawal country down in Canberra, and respect to any First Nations people in the room. I feel like a pariah in the room. I think I'm the first non-safe site registry being presented. Sorry, Mark. Now, through the ANZSRS, Society of Retinal Specialists, we've been running a retinal surgery registry for, it's getting on to 12 or 13 years now. It began, RANSCO 2008, when I had to debate Willie Campbell on the merits of posturing face down post macular hole surgery, and sort of out of that became sort of this challenge. Well, what is the answer? Because both of us thought we won that debate. It started as a research project. In 2009 at RANSCO, we launched the project. It was a paper-based surgical audit of everyone having surgery for macular holes, supported, I don't know if Amanda Wiley's in the room, when Amanda, wonderful ophthalmic nurse based here in Brisbane, was down in Canberra with us, and she sort of collated all these paper forms that we were posting out to people and entered them into a database. The model for a surgical registry is a lot easier than a lot of these chronic disease registries, where we've got a single point in time and we really only had an outcome that was at 3, 12 and 24 months. So we don't follow our patients on an ongoing basis in the VR surgery registry. In 2014, we changed, were successful in achieving an AUREA grant and transitioned the registry to an online platform, which was fantastic. Collaborated with a local IT guy who was working at the hospital at the time, one of our biostatisticians, who'd set up a company called Discover Quick. And we designed ground up a platform which was actually very much like RedCap, except better, because it was much more flexible, to allow surgeons to log on, enter their cases, and the system would automatically prompt them when their follow-ups were due. This was going swimmingly. The model we push, and I think the one that works best, is that surgeons enter the data on the fly in the operating theatre as they go. I hear what you were saying, Mitch, about sustainability. The surgeons, we always have a handful of minutes after each case, and when the data's in your mind, it's so much more accurate and easy than getting someone else who may not know the patients to go back and trawl the notes and try and derive what the grade of PVR was. We do, however, particularly at the Ioneer, you employ a master's student, exactly what you were suggesting, to enter the follow-up data. I think trying to run a busy vitreoretinal clinic with over 100 patients coming through in a morning, doctors everywhere, and then jump into something like this wasn't successful. Unfortunately, Discover Quick went out of business back in around 2020, so we were forced to change platforms. And with the support of Alcon, who provided us with a seed grant, we transitioned over to RedCap, supported by the Monash Registries science group. Not only did RedCap itself is free. It took a bit of work to rebuild all our data forms, but that wasn't too bad. But one advantage of collaborating with the Monash group is their deep expertise in registry science and statistical support. Over the years, we do allow retrospective data entry. So although we really only kicked off in 2009-10, we've had between 30 and 50 and 45 contributing sites per year. It has dropped off a little bit this year. There are about, in perspective, about 150, between 120 and 150 vitreoretinal surgeons in the country. So we're capturing about a quarter to a third of surgeons. Sites include public hospitals. What proportion of cases each of these sites is contributing, however, is variable. As I said, it initially began as a research project trying to answer a specific question about macular holes, and we pushed it right up until 2015 when we reached our required number of cases for to answer the specific question based on the predefined power calculations. It's really pleasing to see that despite us hitting our target and publishing our results, participation has been ongoing, with upwards of 300 cases of macular hole cases being submitted every year, right up until this year. There is a bit of an anomaly this year. I think there's one of our biggest contributors, the eye and ear hospitals, there was a bit of communication fall over, and they haven't been participating quite as strongly this year as in previous years. The main paper was the effect of postoperative face-down positioning, but we've managed to publish a handful of papers using the macular hole data, including collaborating with Noemi Lewis over in Belfast and on a meta-analysis looking at failed holes. We did, I think, answer the question. The model we used was a non-inferiority study, and we did demonstrate that for small and intermediate holes, withholding face-down positioning was non-inferior to face-down positioning. Question remains, I think, unanswered for large holes, though. Through the Monash collaboration, we've also been producing annual reports of risk-adjusted outcomes. At any time in the system, the individual users can log in and produce benchmarking reports of their results against the pooled cohort of results, but they're unadjusted. These adjusted, I trust most people are aware of what a funnel plot is, but the more cases you submit, the tighter the confidence intervals defining what your real outcomes are. And then with the sites that submit fewer cases, the variability is greater. If you're between the solid black lines, then that's the 95% confidence interval. There'll be some random scatter between them, but that's expected. Anomalous sites where they're beyond the 99.5 or way beyond in one case they're flags for the individuals or the site to investigate their own results. We don't do anything about chasing people. We're trying to empower our clinicians to have visibility of what their outcomes are against others, and then hopefully a mature site or doctor will reflect on what's going on and perhaps look at what they do differently and hopefully improve themselves. There's definite evidence that just participating in sites and having visibility of your own results does improve your outcomes. We've been producing funnel plots. One thing we did include in the first couple of annual reports, although we don't do it now, is we've explored this concept of control charts. So as control charts are used in industry to monitor the consistency of an industrial process, like making screws for the space shuttle or something, and if whatever you're measuring starts to fall out of the expected parameters consistently, then it triggers an alarm and which requires investigation. If I go back, can I go back? This site, the blue one, was towards the upper end of failure rates, but within the 95% expected range. And you can see over time their cumulative probability of being outside the expected range was climbing, but it never quite hit the red dotted line in that lower graph, the trigger for an event. This, however, is an example of a site that did hit, for something happened between, in this site between 2016 and 2018, they were having far, just progressively more failed detachment surgeries than they should have, and they hit their sort of alert trigger more than once in that time. Then things stabilised and fell back to normal. The reason we don't produce these include these control charts in our annual reports anymore is they're only really useful in real time, and an annual report's not the way to do this. It's hard, however, to give people on-the-fly risk-adjusted results without a hell of a lot of work, because most of our databases are not statistical packages. You've got to pull the data out and then churn it using Stata in this case. Retinal detachments, we introduced the retinal detachment module when we introduced the online system back in 2014, and quickly we've been accumulating many cases. And out of that, we've published 5 papers so far. The first one was particularly aimed at Ian McAllister. So I'm sick of him saying that the cryo is the weapon of the devil. Unfortunately, I'm sure he's not here, but next time he tries, I've got something against him. One interesting paper was the one on the top right, the analysis of time to failure after retinal detachment surgery. This has helped us actually design the registry, and also down at the Ioneer design our model of care. If you want to capture failed detachment surgery, how long do you need to follow someone? We demonstrated using the registry data that at 87 days, 90% of your failures will have occurred. By 109 days, 95% of your failures would have occurred. So traditionally, we sort of tend to follow people for 3 months, but perhaps, and the UK data also supports this, 4 months would be a better time. And this also has informed a white paper that we've written on the best approach for retinal detachment outcomes measurement. So far in the registry, we've got over 22,000 surgeries, approaching 6,000 macular holes and 8,500 retinal detachments. This year, probably only about 6 or 7 weeks ago, we've added in an epiretinal membrane module. The next audit module will be diabetic eye disease or secondary IOLs. We haven't quite decided yet. Other is everything else. Now, we're trying to habituate our surgeons to put all their cases in. So if it's not one of the audited procedures, then it's an other, and it's just a list. It could be diabetic vitrectomy, it could be endophthalmitis vitrectomy. But if we can get people in the habit of entering something after every case, then hopefully it will, as we add more modules, keep people in the groove. It's been very helpful as well, because coding data from hospitals is not nearly granular enough to tease out epiretinal membranes versus macular holes, for instance. You do need some proper diagnosis, and this has been really helpful for some sort of manual retrospective research projects where we want to target giant retinal tears or something like that. I did want to finish in the last couple of minutes with some reflections on what makes registries, or what influences their success. I think, and we've heard already, they need to be simple. The minimum amount of information to address the questions you want to ask and may want to ask in future. The more you get in there from a research point of view, the better it is. But less likely people are to probably enter that data. So simplicity, I think, is key, and try to embed it into embed the data entry into the daily workflow. Really promoting these registries to the end users is key as well. For vitreoretinal surgery, it's a relatively small community. Cataract surgery is a lot harder, or glaucoma, because you've got 2/3 of the college membership probably would dabble. And continued ongoing reports, standing up in meetings and newsletters. It does get tiring, and I'll touch on the governance of things in a second. The carrot versus the stick. The stick is college CPD requirements, and that's strong and a good incentive for people to participate in registries.
I'm Rohan.
Oh, what's the 5? Oh, is that, okay.
That's this whole session.
Oh, that's,
Yeah.
I thought that was my session. Okay, I don't have 16 minutes. I'm going to stop talking now.
Yeah, thanks very much, Rohan.
No worries.
Yeah, I appreciate all the effort. I'd like to introduce Associate Professor Matthew Simunovic to talk about the fight inherited retina blindness registry. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. This shouldn't take too long. It's a new registry that was recently completed. It's one of the safe site registries. I should acknowledge that the priming funding came from Novartis. The aims of this registry really are twofold. First of all, we want to capture the natural history of inherited retinal degenerations using a standardised nomenclature to classify them. Secondly, and this was a big driver for this registry, is we want to track real-world outcomes following approved retinal gene therapy, specifically looking at outcomes following Luxturna retinal gene therapy. So we did the first surgery in the end of 2020 to deliver this medication. So we've heard all about the safe site registries. I don't need to sort of go over some of the general principles. We assembled a steering committee from various countries, 7 in total, and each of the committee members have an interest in inherited retinal diseases. Some of them have sort of subspecialty interests that are complementary, such as, say, interest in electrodiagnostic testing or psychophysics. We met initially to discuss what outcome measures we might include for Luxturna and what sort of things we want to track for the natural history of these conditions. Early on, we identified that there was a problem with nomenclature. So if you ask 3 different people with an interest in inherited retinal degeneration the name for the same condition, they'll give you 3 different names and each will insist that they're correct. So that's an issue. Fortunately, we recruited somebody onto the steering committee from Manchester, Panos Sigoniotis, who has a special interest in this, and he's been involved in the Human Phenotyping Ontology project, or the HPO. So that solved that issue. So this is just a grab of all of the possible diagnoses that can be selected. So we can record the genotype, but on the left here, we have a list of diagnoses and the corresponding HBO identifiers. And then on the right, we have the common names for these conditions. So each condition is assigned to a phenotypic group by the module, and the phenotypic group in turn determines what the minimum data set is. And so, as I said, in the initial steering committee meeting, we identified what sort of measures we sought to capture at each visit, and then we asked each of the steering committee members which of these measures they would perform at each visit for each phenotypic group. And in green here, we have the measures where there's 100% concordance regarding it being necessary as part of the minimum data set. So the theme here is that everybody thought for every sort of phenotypic group, the visual acuity was important to capture, OCT and fundus autofluorescence. This was followed by electrodiagnostic testing, but we didn't reach 100% concordance for electrodiagnostic testing for choroidal dystrophy and for hereditary vitreoretinopathy and so on and so forth. In terms of the minimum data set for patients undergoing Luxturna gene therapy surgery, this is pretty much determined by regulators. So we need to record best corrected visual acuity before and after treatment, their visual fields, their full field sensitivity testing results. So that's for a full field stimulus presented in a Gansfeld bowl. We need to record their OCTs, and we also need to record patient reported outcomes. Understandably, we need to document any adverse events and pregnancy outcomes. So far in Australia, 14 eyes have been treated from 7 patients, and 6 of them have been treated in Sydney. We've got data available for 12 eyes. We haven't completed all of the follow-up visits, so we've got FST data available for baseline and follow-up for 10 of the eyes. We recently sort of presented the module internationally at a steering committee group for the Research Standing Committee of the APAO. On the bottom right here, you can see a screen grab from the module of a patient who's undergone Luxturna gene therapy surgery. That's me doing the case top right there. The green bars represent visits following the treatment. Their visual acuity happily has improved following treatment, but this isn't really the important outcome measure. What we're really seeking to track is their full field sensitivity testing results. This is a screen grab from the entry field for the patient. So my research orthoptist has been entering the data. It takes 5 minutes to do a baseline visit, and it takes a couple of minutes to do a follow-up visit. So in summary, this is a newly created registry, and it seeks to track both the natural history as well as treatment outcomes following retinal gene therapy. We're using standardised nomenclature, and we use a consensus system to reach the minimum data set. Our very early data on Luxturna gene therapy suggests that in real life, in the patients that we've treated so far, that the outcomes mirror those seen in the clinical trials, where patients have improved in their overall sensitivity by over a log unit. That's the URL of the site. Safe Site Registries has a booth downstairs, which if you're interested in any of the registries, please visit. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. What we might do then, have the last talk, and then we can open up to any questions for the panel at the end with remaining time. I'd like to introduce Dr Ashley Kras. He's going to talk about the potential of registries to inform personalised medicine.
Thanks, Hill. Very humbled to be sharing a platform with people who have clearly contributed a great deal more than I towards registries in general. Particular thanks to Hemal and Mark Gillies, who was the grandfather of the Safe Site Registries, for their support in my endeavours early on in my career. And I guess that sort of swims into what the topic of this is about, which is looking ahead, where do registries go in the future. And yeah, love to be able to be sitting down there, hoping to contribute towards thinking about how we can integrate more data types and think about this in a more personalised way using, how do you go next slide, apologies?
Just the big green button.
Oh yeah. Okay, so 5 minutes, try and answer 3 questions. Why do we need this now? What is it, in fact, about the modern day that technology, AI analytics, and data-driven insights can enable, and how does this make registries more personalised? 2 specific use cases. One is an extension that's currently under production of the FRB module in the Safe Site Registries for geographic atrophy, and how technology and the linkage of multimodal data sets can enhance that, and then also how we can apply these rich data sources to increasingly personalise the development and deployment of AI into the point of care. So, 1, why do we need this? So this is with registries in general, but obviously eye-focused. We can even think about this in terms of precision retina. This is just a very brief, very high-level infographic of the wet AMD pipeline that's probably not lost on most in the room. Equally large is that in the dry AMD space, as well as many others. We've got biosimilars coming through, new therapeutic agents with molecular targets. They're all going to require new management strategies, different intervals to consider, and then new clinical challenges as well, considering how to confront matters that were raised earlier about how to deal with geographic atrophy and how that may convert to and or from wet macular degeneration. Already, we've seen how this is equally applicable to personalising decision-making in the glaucoma space through Mitch's talk on glaucoma, and how some of this can also be used for prognostication through Jamie's risk stratification score explanation. So why is it that we need this sort of to move forward and have more data-driven insights wrapped around it? Well, I think one of the prevailing sort of hot topics of this conference, in fact, has been about how do we apply the findings of the phase 3 Oaks Derby studies in geographic atrophy to the real world. It really highlights the need for real world data, both to supplement randomised clinical trial data, as well as continue to crack them ongoing as we enter new clinical areas to try and understand wet to dry, dry to wet, etc. And it also stands to address increasingly important social matters like demographic diversity and how safety and efficacy differs amongst patients in the real world. So how does this all happen? So the Registries today on the left, step through left to the right. Registry today collects tabular data. You've seen many screenshots of examples of how you might enter. It takes variable amounts of time. One of the key messages that Mark has always been very strong on is that this needs to be easy and quick and collect the most important minimal viable data sets. We've heard some other opinions and reasons why that might differ, but at the end of the day, this is all varying forms of tabular data, which can range from demographics to clinical data and other numerical, be they discrete or continuous variables. Once we look ahead at integrating other data sources, such as multimodal imaging, which is effectively an indispensable part of modern ophthalmic practice, as well as any of the omics, such as those that Jamie mentioned, and as well as Matt, and the other data sources like from primary care, functional visual outcomes, whatever they may be. We crunch them all together, put them into the cloud and link them all, and then effectively overlay modern capabilities of AI analytics, which is beyond the scope of this discussion, but ultimately bringing all of that together. And again, that can arise from different clinical sites as well as different different sources of information, all to come back to lead and build to a holistic vision picture of a single individual patient to help guide care for that person in the best way. So I'm just going to, this really links to the following slide, which was to talk about an enhancement to the Fight Retinal Blindness Registry as an example. But at its core, what drives a lot of this is the migration to the cloud that can bring together data from disparate sources and then link them interoperably using modern standards such as FHIR for tabular data and DICOM for imaging data that have natively very well integrated interfaces that function well together, out of which can be produced predictive AI analytics that can then be linked back to that same patient at a given patient visit level encounter. I'm going to answer any questions on details of that afterwards, but just going a little deeper into this GA expansion and why this is so important, particularly today. This is a module that Hemal is leading that's going to be an extension of the existing very successful and translationally impactful macular degeneration model that Mark began over 10 years ago. As it stands today, so we look at these fields for geographic atrophy. We'll be adding some additional fields, but then in addition, this is just a very basic example of what an additional modality of data that is not tabular could do to this, which is change things dramatically by adding imaging parameters such as the GA area lesion size, and that can be integrated at the point of care, a pain point that's been discussed and mentioned in various contexts by speakers before me today. And this is imaging is the perfect use case for artificial intelligence applications, because even within this beautifully well-defined minimum viable data set of clinical and tabular data, you can't argue with a pixel, but you can always argue with another doctor, and more often than not, people often do. I guess, so that was just a bit of one tangible example, and this almost forget the details of this slide unless you can follow it, just conscious of time, but this, to date, exclusively, AI development in ophthalmology has been limited to imaging parameters alone. That is because at the point of care, when we want to deploy a model then for a specific patient, we run the model against the image. And that is because there is an inherently limited ability to integrate both clinical tabular data with imaging data at that time, in real time together as inputs to that AI model that will generate outputs. With real-time interoperability that's cloud-driven, that diagram earlier explained, we can start to develop more personalised models that can, that will really hit hard at differentiating from a patient who's going to have an inherently differently looking image at the age of 20 than they will at the age of 80. And with this capability, we're going to start to see the beginnings very soon of the development of models using different forms of data because of the ability now we have to deploy them at the point of care, which again is a more personalised algorithm that patients can help inform patient care and hopefully receive more personalised and better outcomes. Yes, we'll stop there.
Thank you. I'd like to thank all the speakers for giving their excellent presentations. There's a lot of different registries that have been discussed during this session, and you can get more information. Each of the speakers has put up ways in which you can access more information. There's a lot of stands also in the exhibit hall. There's been a lot of mention of safe site registries, but there's one other one that we didn't have space for today, which was the Fight Uveitis Blindness Registry. And I think Richard Symes is actually at the stand during the break, if you want to have a play with that module or any other module. I think to wrap up the session, I just want to ask, I'll just say thank you to the panel members, and particularly I'd like to ask Mark, essentially, really for a lot of us, the sort of the father of this sort of specialty, you want to wrap up with any closing comments?
Yeah, well, I think the registries that we've built, and I think Rohan's as well, and from what I understand of the ANZSRS, the advanced glaucoma, they've been designed to be used by clinicians. They're designed by clinicians. The FRB fields, the retinal fields, really only have about 5 fields, and that's about 10 seconds of follow-up visit. So it's about, if you want to track your outcomes, they are probably the most efficient way to do it. And I'd encourage everyone to become involved with this. It's very much your own project. If you only want to not share your data and do it by yourself and not let other people see it, that's also possible. If you're asked to participate in a national or international analysis, we'd always ask if your data, it will tell you if your data are eligible, and we'd always ask for your permission to use it.
It's really good now you're looking at the dry geographic atrophy component.
Yeah.
That'll be a whole new world.
A whole new world, and it's very important that we track these outcomes. And also, what's also important to track at the moment in Australia is Mavazi, because people are starting to use that, and it's an excellent system to track. We'll find out very quickly if people enter the data whether there's any major adverse events associated with that. We're not going to find out any other way.
Okay, thank you. I know you've kept the time, and I know it's difficult to have any questions because it's been such a packed session. So thank you very much, and we'll do more at the next Congress with different registries. Thank you.